Thimon, thank you so much for joining me. Where are you speaking to me from today?
Well, Maria, thank you for inviting me. I'm presenting from Amsterdam, my virtual studio here at home.
Wonderful. You sound fantastic. Tell me about your microphone.
Oh, it's actually I play in a band. I play bass guitar and I do the backing vocals. So this is my backing vocal mic. It's a mic bands use. I think it's a Shure M52, 57. Well, it's
Sounds
standard
great.
band mic. Yeah.
Oh, sounds great. Might have to have some of your music if we get time. So, is that what you wanted to be when you were growing up? Did you want to be in a band? Did you want to be a rock star?
No. I wanted to be a professional mountain biker for a very long time. I actually went and studied in Maastricht, the southern part of the Netherlands, the only part of the Netherlands that has hills. So I chose the town first, the city first, the university first, and then picked the study. But then when I started racing, I was too tall and too heavy and realized that was not not for me. So that was that's my whole teenage years. That's what I wanted to be.
Fantastic. And how did you move from that to studying human behavior? I mean, that's a bit of a leap.
Well, I think I've been fascinated by humans and why they do what they do from a very young age. So it made sense studying that. And my first real job was a journalist, and then writing about people and their behavior. I worked for Youth magazine, so curiosity and why do people do what they do. And then went to work for a research firm. So the I find people endlessly fascinating, and when you think you figured something out, something has changed in the outside world, and then people change again. So there's never an end. So there's always something to learn and to see and to analyze. So yeah, it's really my passion, studying human behavior. Yes.
It's actually very clever as well because you'll never run out of people to study, will you? It's a job that keeps growing and growing forever. So that's very clever.
Yeah, you can just put me on a bench anywhere. If there are people, I just sit there and watch watch them and look at how they behave and try to, there's always something to see. So busy airports, any city, town, if there's people around, I'm there being interested and taking notes sometimes even.
Okay, but you've sort of specialized specifically on the future of human behavior. Why the future? Why not what's going on now?
Um, that's a wonderful question. Because it actually brings like an extra element. So it's like an extra puzzle. So historians, everything has happened, and then you try to make sense of it. But with the future, there's this extra element of uncertainty added to all of that. So to say something about the future, how we are going to behave, you still have to look in history, what has happened in the past that we can use now. You use current trends. So what trends can we see that are happening, or are there pendulum like shifts happening? So will we bounce back from certain developments? And then there's this extra element that you bring into, and of course it's a fun thing to see. All right, so I try to argue using all kinds of research that this is going to happen. And then a few years later, you can say, all right, I was right, I was wrong, I was partly right, I was partly wrong. So it's also, yeah, it's almost a bit more like a game, because you have to, it's fun to see if all the research and insights are correct.
It doesn't, and we're all interested in the future, aren't we? We all want to know what's going to happen next. So that sort of prediction piece is quite exciting.
Yes.
How accurate can you be though?
Well, I think when it comes to humans don't change, in the sense that our needs, our fears, our wishes, our desires, they don't change much. It's just how they manifest themselves, they change. So for example, how we respond to new technologies, how we respond to a crisis situation like the pandemic we're in now, that doesn't change. Only the situation that we're in, the state of the economy, the state of technology, the political situation that we're in. So it is in general, if you're talking about groups of people, their behavior and how they respond, it's you can say quite a lot of things of, you know, what will happen. If you try to be very specific for an individual, that is very hard, almost impossible to do, because individuals might act very randomly. But for groups, and it's not that extreme. So you have, you know, futurists out there that do very extreme extrapolations, and then they come in the media. But most of the times the future is not that spectacular. But the non-spectacular futures are often the right ones.
Yeah, and I suppose the nuances are really important to understand from, you know, when you're planning as a business leader, or you've got to take it into consideration.
Yes, yeah, definitely, and the practicality. So the future, you know, you can prepare quite well for things that will happen. So, for example, how we come out of this pandemic as societies, as human beings. There's so much research done throughout history, how societies come out of pandemics, or how societies come out of wartime situations, because these two are comparable. And copy paste is a big word, but it's, you can take so many elements, paste them on today's world, and you can safely predict quite a few things that will happen, and that we already see happening right now. And that's for business to prepare for, and leaders, and they quite feel, you know, if you explain to them, all right, so this is what happened in the past, this is how it compares to today, you see actually the leaders are working, go, all right, that makes sense, okay, I know what to do now, thanks. So they have the information to actually practically act, and it gives them peace of mind, because there's so much information, you know, the information overload cliches, which is true, adding social media and all the craziness into that. So a lot of professionals I work with are quite, you know, restless. And then if you connect a few dots for them and give them like a practical layer as well, it's kind of a sigh of relief. All right, thanks, I have something, you know, to base my decisions on, and now I know how to move forward.
That's wonderful. Give people peace of mind and give them a bit of certainty in the uncertainty. Wow, that's fantastic. You seem to attract, in particular, a lot of tech and IT clients. Is that because their world is moving faster, or is there something more to that?
Yeah, tech, and I think the second group of clients is financial services. I actually think that's because the people side is missing in these larger tech firms, in the sense that there are not enough psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists working there. They're all focused on, you know, the ones and zeros, the tech, the programmers, and then they make a beautiful product, a new service, and then, you know, people do not adopt it, they cannot sell it, or they use it in a different way, or it has unintended consequences. And then it's all right, let's bring, I often say I represent the people side, so then I come in, or someone like me, and then say, all right, so this is, you know, the people side of things. Same goes for finance. They're all about, you know, the Excel sheets and you know, finance, and then they don't have them internally, so they bring in the people experts externally, and yeah, so I've been working with quite a few tech firms. All right, so you've developed something wonderfully, and now let me help you with how you actually get people to use that and to embrace it.
And actually, it's true, because we've seen it in the past, haven't we, where you know, a development has been created, and people use it completely differently, and they use features that actually, I mean, certainly SMS was one of them, wasn't it? That it was never developed for us to use and to use text. It was for wasn't it for the people who had created it? So yeah, so we don't always behave predictably. That's really interesting. You mentioned also.
Oh, wait, I would say that's predictably. So if you look at
Oh,
technology, most people don't like new technologies. They're like, all right, now there's this small group of early adopters, but it's a small group. But the general public does not trust new technologies. And we've known this for over 100 years. But for some reason, IT firms think we have this new app, we have this self-driving car, we have the Google Glass, people will love this, but they don't. So they forget the psychological, emotional element. And if you don't take that in, you know, your whole innovation process or the way you launch a product, then the product will fail.
and I imagine also the experience of using it as well is really important to understand how people will react to it, because sometimes the idea of something is fantastic, but then the actual experience of using it is so hard and so horrible. Do you get involved in that side too, the actual experience?
Sometimes, Well, yeah, my previous career, I worked at a research consultancy firm, and we really deep dove into certain, projects with clients. And nowadays, as a keynote speaker, I'm more on, the start of a project to get things kickstarted. When the strategy is being developed, and when it's really, the user experience or the UX design, there are other experts out there with more in-depth, more detailed. So I'm more on the, the leadership and the strategy, the big trends, the meta, what's happening in the outside world, and how will that influence us. But if it gets very detailed, then there are other experts there.
Yeah, and that actually the whole strategy piece is really important, because you've got to, as Stephen Covey says, you've got to begin with the end in mind. So the strategic piece is really important. You mentioned unintended consequences, which sort of raises a few red flags, doesn't it? Unintended consequences, especially when we talk about ethical behavior and AI. There's been so many huge developments. What about the ethical part of it? Any thoughts on that?
Well, the ethical part is something that often comes last, in the sense that you develop the technology is being developed, the AI is being developed, and then when it starts to be released, then in the media, social media, there are all these ethical concerns, and then it's, oh wait, what do we do there? And then you see that there's some wonderful initiatives where a lot of big Silicon Valley IT firms have now a sort of a code of conduct where they say we're going to use AI ethically. But it's a bit, how shall we say it? It's not in the start of the process. And I actually think that we're going to move where ethics are going to be moved, as one of the starting points. And also, if you take an organizational pyramid, that we now have, ethics officers somewhere, at the bottom of the organizational pyramid. And I think we're going to see this decade, we're going to see like a chief ethics officer or chief privacy officer. We have chief diversity and inclusion officer. So we're going to see in the C-suite, we're going to see people responsible for ethics. And not have it be something that's added on as a last finishing touch of paint, but actually that it's going to be, embedded in the whole organization. And there will be someone in the C-suite responsible. And I've met many leaders that say, oh, I can do that as well. It's part of my, I'm the CEO. I do ethics as well, because, what are you saying? Am I not ethical? But I compare that often to IT. In the 1990s, IT was not in the C-suite. It was somewhere organizational pyramid in the bottom. And now every organization has a CIO, a CTO, a CD, chief digital officer. And I think ethics are going to go the same way, whether it's, the ethics of AI, whether it's the environment, whether it's the ESG, social. It's going to be increasingly important.
That's interesting. You've given us a really great prediction there. You've predicted how organizations are going to change. Thank you for that. That's really invaluable.
Thank you.
I imagine hand in hand with ethics, the other important area is trust.
Yes.
Is trust changing?
Yes and no. So trust is a bit like energy. Trust is not, it's always going somewhere. You can't fully take it away, but we do live in often trust experts call it low trust times. And trust is in a bit of crisis. It was already there in the 2010s, but now thanks to the pandemic and all the misinformation that's out there, people are anxious, they're tired. The mental health statistics around the globe are, we're not doing well, and that influences trust levels in society. So if we look at what kind of information do people trust, how do you make a buying decision, how do you make a decision what kind of political party you're going to vote for, we see that trust is low. And people are very much focused inward. So I'm only going to trust people that, I know personally, my neighbor across the street, my colleague from work. And, we're very much focused inwards. And that's part of this, as we're still in this crisis situation. But it depends a little bit in what part of the world you're in. If you trust the government here in the Netherlands, trust in government is still high, but other parts of Europe, it's completely the opposite. So yeah, I can talk about the, trust
It's
is
so
like
important.
one of my
Yeah.
but it's key to any trust is key to any relationship. So any client relationship, all leaders want to be high trust leaders. And how do you do that in low trust time? Brands, organizations want to be high trust brands, high trust organizations. And it's actually very difficult. So the environment changes, but the key component is like, how can you get a high trust relationship? How can you be a high trust leader? So these these fundamentals don't change, but the environment changes, like the crisis that we're in. So that's a thing that I try to explain to the organizations, leaders I work with. You know, how does that work, and how can you increase trust in yourself and in your organization?
Really valuable, really valuable. And you mentioned relationships, and one of the things that you talk about is the fact that relationships, both personal and business, are getting shorter. That's a bit concerning, isn't it?
Yeah. So, okay. So these are questions that I have to be careful that I not go into full keynote mode. So, for example, I'll give you one example. So, there are wonderful statistics on how long the time is that people spend on average in a job. So, how many years do you work for a certain employer? Now, the average in Europe now, so these are Eurostat figures, is now 4.5 years. So on average, the average European employee spends 4.5 years at an employer. And if you go to youngsters in their 20s, early 30s, it's 2.7 years, 2 point something, which is quite short. And you know that famous or infamous job interview question, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Well, the
Somewhere
honest
else.
answer would be somewhere else, right? So we already know, you know, the lifelong career, you know, it's long gone. But still, I have so many conversations with organizations and HR teams that say we want to keep our talent, and our talent is leaving, and we give them these wonderful programs, and we pay them well, and then they disappear. The war for talent. And I say, you know, these are times. So actually, one of the piece of advice I give is you should facilitate talent leaving instead of this strategy. Try to keep them in, force them in as much as possible. So say, I know this head of HR at this wonderful multinational on the other side of Europe. I'm going to get you a place there. And, you know, hopefully I'll see you in 2-3 years time, because we know that young people, you know, they're going to switch jobs from here to there, building their careers. So that's just one example on, you know, shorter relationships in the, you know, really quantitative, if you look at the time they spend at, you know, employers.
Fascinating. It's changed so much over the years. The generations behave so differently, don't they? And we've talked a lot, you know, in business about millennials, and that's been the main focus. But you like to focus on Gen Z because you say they're quite different too. How are they different? I'm sorry, I'm asking you for a thesis
Yeah,
question.
that's right. It's fine. I try. Wonderful question. So Gen Z is the youngest generation that we now see in sociological research. So they're born approximately, it's not very strict, from 1998 onwards. So they're in their early 20s now, the oldest ones. So how they're different. So like two things, because again, talk for hours about this. One is they're the most entrepreneurial generation of all generations. So we can actually measure entrepreneurialism, the most entrepreneurial generation. So if they start to work at firms, they might be your interns or your young talent. If you don't give them entrepreneurial, you know, some kind of entrepreneurial part in their job, just say, you know, you're 22, you do what I say, you know, they're going to leave. So you have to let them be entrepreneurial. Secondly, it's a very activist generation. Now, young people are always more, you know, when it's about ideals and changing the world, that's part of being young. So that's a life phase thing. But with the millennials, the way they were activists, we sometimes refer to them in sociology as clicktivists. So they were very much active online, social media campaigns on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube. But the fun thing with Gen Z, they actually are street protesting again. And I actually thought, so this is a thing where I was wrong. I thought street protesting would be a thing of the past and everything would move even more online. And the interesting thing is, so we saw their activist behavior coming. So we were right there because that was in the research for quite a few years already, but they're actually street protesting. So where does the climate, Black Lives Matter, the past year, they're going back to school. We saw school strikes all over Europe. In the Netherlands, they're protesting here for a better mental health care system. So this is actually a generation that when they start to work for an employer, you know, this is not a generation that sits back and might like a tweet. This is actually a generation that stands up for what they believe, what they want, will hit their fist on the table. Actually, well, I don't think they're going to strike at work, but this is a generation that actually acts and collectively. So these are not individuals behind their own device. No, we're going with the group on the streets to get, what we want. And I think it's a wonderful generation. I have two. Well, you can't see now we're in the podcast, but I have two Gen Z colleagues working with me in the back there. And it's, if I think back of what I was doing when I was 21 compared to the youngsters now, it's light years difference.
Wow, fantastic. It's useful that you've got two Gen Zs working with you because you can study them. That's quite useful in itself, isn't it?
Yes.
So you're passionate about youth. You're passionate about ethics. These are two topics you talk about. Are you an activist yourself?
Activist in the sense that I say I represent the people side. So often I think there's too much focus on, the stakeholders, the shareholders. What are we doing? What's the stock market doing? How are share prices? And I think, if I come in to represent the people side and say, it's about the people. And if you take, as an organization, if you take care of people, not only the ones working for you or your customers, but society as a whole and the society you operate in, I think the world will be a better place. And it's actually what people want. It's what the customers really want. It is what, their colleagues want. It's what the leaders want. If you sit down with them and think, what do you really think is important? We all think the same things are important. And these deep human needs and desires. So if I think, yes, I'm activist, I sometimes refer to it as indirect activism because I'm not a Greta Thunberg, but I bring in the people side. And if we really take care of people, taking that as a broad definition, then I think the world will, and the world of business will also be a better place.
Completely agree with you.
It's a win-win-win.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. So give us some insights as to what you will be working on in the future. What sort of themes are you looking at?
Well, one big theme is mental health. We're not doing well when it came to our mental health before the pandemic. So the World Health Organization said if the trends continue, all the indicators, we're going into a pandemic, a global mental health pandemic. Now we get a different pandemic, and COVID has made everything worse. And the interesting thing, and again referring to Gen Z, this is a generation. They're the most open generation as of yet talking about their mental health. My generation, I'm 43. If I break my arm and I talk to a group of peers, men my age, we can talk for hours about broken bones. But if I say, guys, I'm a bit depressed lately, then there's a silence and someone will say, here's a drink, or let's go for a bike ride, you feel better, and that's it. And the interesting thing with the youngsters and what we see in the research is that they can talk almost similar to a broken arm. They can talk about, I have anxiety, I feel depressed. They talk in a similar way. And that we already see a shift happening in society and the way we approach mental health. And I think Gen Z is going to lead the way. And that's one of our new research topics that I'm very much looking forward to the coming years.
They might teach us actually how to deal with it and how to handle it. That's really refreshing.
Reverse mentoring.
Yeah.
So do you already have a reverse mentor, a youngster?
Yeah, well, yes, we all need one. We all need a reverse mentor. Yeah, brilliant advice.
But do you have one, Maria?
I don't actually. I do work with younger speakers, and so they sort of give me insights. But maybe you could be, because you're younger than me, Thimon.
Oh, I call myself middle-aged. The more you work with young people, the older you feel. So.
Yeah, that's the problem. So it's best not to work with young people because you'll feel old. No, it's true. I think it's a really excellent idea, and maybe all leaders should have a young mentor.
It's a thing we advise, and it doesn't work for every leader, but we always say try it, give it a try, or here's a practical tip. If you pick someone from your own organization, they might feel reluctant to speak their mind. So find, a neighbor or a nephew or a niece, or, a friend of your daughter. Find someone that's, would be safe and open, and give it a try. Because I have a few leaders say, I have no time. It's not good. Give it a try. And if you've spoken with a younger person for 1-2 hours, and then come back to me and tell me what doesn't work. And that hasn't happened yet. So there's some resistance to the idea, but if they've done it, they're like, oh, wow, this was eye-opening.
Okay, we'll put that challenge out there, I think. So you're challenged now to do that, to speak to somebody
Yes.
youngster, somebody Gen Z. You've heard it here for 1 or 2 hours, and then reach out if you're a leader to Timon and tell him how you got on. I think that would be very interesting. So listen, I've made you talk about all sorts of topics, and I've only allowed you a small amount of time. So we all know you can go much deeper, and if anybody wants to go deeper with you, you're available to hire, of course. But let me ask you a question about your speaking. Let's end on this. Some final thoughts. What makes a great speaker, and what advice would you give?
Yeah, I'm being asked this a lot, and often at the conferences I go to, there's always, you know, the strategic offsite. There are always internal speakers as well, and they often ask me this. And the most easy and quick, honest answer I can give is, if you're passionate about the thing you're talking about, then you're already there. If you're truly passionate about, you know, the topic at hand, you can turn your back towards the audience. You can have the most awful PowerPoint slide in the world. If you're passionate, then you're there. And often I have, you know, people who want to make a career in speaking, or, you know, at an internal conference, they're forced to talk about the new innovation strategy. And I say, if you're not really convinced, if you're not really passionate about that innovation strategy, ask a different colleague. And if you want to move into this field, don't pick a topic that you think will sell best. Find a topic that you're truly passionate about. And then practice, 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 because people say, "Oh, you're a natural," and I say, "No, I did courses as well. If I have a new opening, I might practice that like 50 times out loud in my bedroom, hotel bedroom, before I go out into stage. I still do." You know, if you have the Lionel Messi's, the footballers out there, they still practice every day. And you could think that Messi can now pass the ball from A to B, but he still trains every day. So practice, 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 and everyone can learn this. And if you're passionate there, practice plus passion, and then you're there.
Absolutely. I mean, passion is absolutely infectious. I'm infected by your passion. It really is. The practice thing,
Thanks.
you know, as a musician, you practice, practice, practice. You're absolutely right. As a speaker, you should practice, practice. Excellent, excellent advice. Timon, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you a little bit better. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. But yeah, I did. The time flew past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.